What's up, everybody? Today, I'm going to be giving you some practical advice to taking taxis in Managua, Nicaragua. Alright? So first off, you don't really have any trouble finding taxis. They're super easy to find, and most of the cars that are on the road are taxis. It's important to understand that while most things in this country are much cheaper than in the United States, gasoline is actually almost the same price as it is in the United States. So therefore, it's quite expensive relative to the cost of everything else. And because of this, most people do not have vehicles here. It's not like in the States where a lot of people have a car. Most individuals, especially locals, do not drive themselves. And honestly, they don't really need to. Like in the States, you can use services like Lyft and Uber, and you have to pay a pretty decent amount of money for that. Whereas here, if you live in Managua, you can get anywhere in the city for a couple dollars, okay? So there's a couple things that you should know if you want to take taxis. First off, you need to know some basic Spanish, all right? So the Spanish that you need to know is the numbers 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100, all right? So that's Diez, Veinte, Treinta, Cuarenta, Cinquenta, Sesenta, Setenta, Ochenta, Noventa, and Cien, okay? If you know these numbers, then you can negotiate with taxis, because they're not going to be like, oh, I will charge you 83 chords. That's not how it works. It's always in denominations of 10, okay? And in general, this is how it's going to work. You flag a taxi down, and typically you have to wait like between 30 seconds to 5 minutes. You're not going to have to spend much time finding a taxi unless you're in a remote area of Managua, okay? They're going to come up to you, and then you can say the name of the place that you're going to go to. A lot of addresses here in Nicaragua are relative, okay? So like where I live is like 2 blocks west of a certain place in the neighborhood. So you at least need to know the neighborhood name that you're going to. They're not gonna, like, they don't have to drop you off exactly where you live. As long as you can get close enough, you're gonna be able to figure out where you're going. So you need to know the name of the neighborhood. In my case, I live in Bologna, and I live near something called Canal Dos, which is Channel 2 News, okay? So when I get a taxi, I can go, Bologna, Canal Dos, and they understand where to take me, and it's not right in front of my house, but it's like a minute walk away, okay? And there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind when you're using taxis here in Managua. Generally, the minimum price that you're going to pay to get anywhere is 40 cordobas, which is 40 chords. This is a bit more than $1. There's a couple factors that would increase this. These factors are how far you're going, the time of day, the amount of traffic, if you have other people with you, if you have groceries, something heavy, these kind of things, and also what you look like. Like me, for example, I'm white, so people will sometimes try and charge me more because they associate white people with having more money and also being ignorant about how much things actually cost. So you can find that a local could get charged like 40 chords for something, and then they'll try and charge a tourist like 80, like double, right? And this brings up haggling. You can always lower the price by 10 to 20 chords, and they will almost always accept it. If they say 60 and you try and do 40, maybe not as often, but you can always lower by 10, always. So the way that works, I would say, hola, cuánto es Bologna, Canal Dos, and then wait a second, and then they would say something like ochenta, and then I go setenta, which is 10 less than 80, right? And again, 10 less is almost always going to work. 20 less will usually work. Sometimes, like my local friends, one in particular, will like really aggressively haggle. And the thing is, there's so many taxis that if you really want to do that, you absolutely can, because like it's often that like 2 taxis will stop and like you just get the one with the better price. Or sometimes they say the same, right? And you pick one. So we need to talk a little bit about safety, because if you're traveling in the daytime, you really don't need to worry too much about it. It is important that you try and profile the taxis a little bit. If they are pushing you, like you are maybe not necessarily looking for a taxi, but someone pulls up and is like, oi, 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 oi. You don't want to work with people who are pushing you. Just because in general, they tend to be a bit more aggressive drivers, and car accidents are a real thing. And some of these taxi drivers are intense and a little bit scary. Like, I've been in taxis where I'm like, okay, I wish I didn't get in that car. But in general, it's pretty fine. And those experiences that I have with more aggressive taxi drivers cause me to be a bit more hesitant about like just using any taxi driver, because you don't necessarily want to just use the first one who shows up. You want to make sure you're paying attention to kind of how they're driving as they come up to you, and again, note their body language and their aggression. If they're being really quick and kind of forceful with you, you can just wait and get another taxi. There's no problem. Again, this is going to cost you like a minute of your time, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. If it's later in the day, 5 minutes, right? So try and be aware of the taxi drivers. There's plenty of really nice taxi drivers out there, and you can also develop relationships with taxi drivers where you get their phone number and then you can have them meet you at a certain place at a certain time. This is all completely possible, and that's something that a lot of people do here, because really you don't need to have your own vehicle. You can pay taxis almost like a tiny bit more than the cost of gas. It really isn't that expensive to use taxis to get places. Relatively, it is pretty expensive. Like, if you consider the fact that most buses here cost 2.5 cords, that's 2.5 cords, right? There are 30 cords in $1. So you are talking about less than 10 cents to get on a bus that could take you anywhere in the city. So relatively, it's about a penny, right? But relatively, you are paying more with the taxis. But in general, especially compared to American prices, it is much cheaper than having like a vehicle or using Lyft or Uber or these kind of things. So one thing that you should pay attention to is if you are traveling at night, you do need to be a bit more careful about the taxis that you pick. Like most of my friends, especially the girls, when they travel alone in a taxi, they always get a friend to write down the number of the taxi cab in case something happens. Because there have been times where a taxi cab driver will take you somewhere and rob you. This kind of thing has happened to people. And at night, it becomes more likely, okay? So you just have to be careful. And as long as you follow some few basic rules, you're going to be fine. In general, if you're traveling at night, you shouldn't ever travel alone. Sometimes this is unavoidable, but in general, you should always travel with people, especially at night. In the daytime, it's not that big of a deal. Most of the time, like as a tourist, you want to travel with people, but this is just so that you feel comfortable. You may get looks, people may go like, "Oi, chele!" They may like try and communicate with you. But as long as it's in the daytime and you're not like intruding upon someone's space, you're not messing in some government area or something, you're gonna be fine, okay? So that's pretty much everything that I know about taking taxis. Let me know if you want any more of these kind of videos. I'm happy to do anything about living in Nicaragua. I plan on being here for a long time. I know some really, really awesome people. And to be honest, being here, it's so much easier to be happy. People here have a better sense of like what you need to be happy, and they aren't as rushed as Americans tend to be. They tend to be more focused on eating their food slower and sharing and spending time together. And really, as a human, this is really important. A lot of the people I know in the States struggle with depression, and one of the reasons that I think this is true is because they lack a basic community that they're part of, whereas here, it's quite easy to be part of a community. People spend a lot of time together here, and they quite often share things, and I really love the culture here. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ciao! Did I do it? Oh, whoa! Awkward ending.